I think our opportunity as we look at how can we bring more innovative thinking and maybe creative problem solving is to start to get more curious first about the problem. And instead of maybe looking at a program that needs to be written or thinking about a design that maybe, it's a typical kind of design you've done many times over, is to start to ask yourself, okay, let me just sit with the problem for a little while and let me ask questions but not jump to answering them.
Welcome to the Techcast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today we are joined by Carla Johnson, a renowned innovation architect who helps companies like Amazon and Intel break free from status quo thinking. With a background that spans from electrical engineering to authoring 10 books on the subject, she champions the idea that innovation is everyone's business. She reframes the AI conversation, positioning humans as the essential muse to the machine. In this episode, we'll get practical exercises to jolt engineers out of incremental thinking and bold imagination. So, Carla, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate you inviting me on to have our conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you here. So, Carla, you described yourself as an innovation architect. So, to me, that sounds quite fascinating. So, could you give us a background of how it all started, from your initial part in electrical engineering to where you are right now, with what you call an innovation architect? So, I'd like to have a background of, the career pivot and how it all started.
Absolutely. Well, I guess my career in engineering started because I have 4 older siblings who are all very, very left brain thinkers. And my oldest was career military, and then he went to work for Raytheon. My second brother is a biologist turned attorney. My third brother is a PhD engineer. My sister is a computer science major, and she worked on projects like the Star Wars program, and she said they used to have to watch CNN to see if her work worked. And so here I come along, the fifth kid, and all I ever know, I mean, I grew up on a real small farm in Northeast Nebraska, family farm, fourth generation, and all I knew were science and, technical kind of careers because that's what all of my siblings had. And it was kind of what my cousins also had. I mean, one was a Navy pilot. One was a doctor who went into oral facial plastic surgery, reconstructive surgery. And so it was all very science driven. I was great at science and math in high school. And so when it was time to decide what do I do after high school, engineering was kind of a natural next path. So I went to the University of Nebraska Lincoln. Go Huskers if you're a football fan or volleyball fan. They have an amazing volleyball team. And started to study electrical engineering. But what I found is that um, I was too curious and interested in too many tangential topics to be good at engineering, to follow that kind of a structured curriculum at that age. And so I studied electrical engineering for a couple of years, and then I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study. So instead of um, wasting or investing my money and the university's time in something I didn't know where it was going to go, I worked full time and I went to school part time. And along the way, I found marketing, and I had always been a natural writer. And so that worked really well for me. And my first job was for an architecture firm. And so what I had learned, the basics of lettering and some basic engineering theories worked really well for me to work for an architecture firm. And then over time, I consistently worked for bigger and bigger firms. And so the last one that I worked for was HDR. They're quite a big firm now, architecture and engineering. I worked on the architecture side. They also have a big engineering practice, wastewater treatment and things like that. But what I learned there was talking to design architects and actually some of the engineers. That's when I saw really how creative engineers and their thinking really is. And so when I worked with design architects, one of the questions that they would consistently ask the clients is, what do you want people to feel when they're inside this space? So if it's if it's a public space, does it need to have a lot of energy like a concert hall? Is it a shopping mall? Is it a place of worship and contemplation where people need to be more calm? Is it a education environment where it needs to spark curiosity? And so that whole idea of what do we want people to feel first? And then now how do we reverse engineer that into the designs that they created? So that was really, without me even knowing it, a big introduction into innovation and how I approach innovative thinking. And along the way, it was natural. I worked with a lot of engineers, and then after I left the AEC world, I worked in the telecom field, again very engineering driven, and then I started my own company. And what I found is what made me successful was my ability to have that very left brain thinking, like a Frank Lloyd Wright, who was always looking at how to make things work, and that right brain thinking, like a Lady Gaga. And somebody said to me once, Carla, if Frank Lloyd Wright and Lady Gaga had a love child, you are what they would get. And she called me an innovation architect, that ability to architect ideas and make them come to fruition. And so, in my path through marketing and design with architecture and my background in understanding engineering and a lot of exposure to it, that brought me to where I am today as an innovation architect.
Wow, that's indeed an interesting story there, Carla. So, you say that innovation is everybody's business. So, not just for people with hefty degrees, yeah. So, for the engineers and developers in our audience who are often tasked with building and executing, how can they start to claim a bigger role in the creative and innovative process?
I think one of the biggest things I see, and I see this in software a lot because my husband is an agile scrum master. But I think one of the things that we tend to do in a field that's very left brain and specific, has very clear rules. I mean, the rules of physics aren't things we're going to innovate, is that we tend to think that there is a process and a framework and a way to think about everything. But I think our opportunity, as we look at how can we bring more innovative thinking and maybe creative problem solving, is to start to get more curious first about the problem. And instead of taking, maybe looking at a program that needs to be written or thinking about a design that maybe, it's a typical kind of design you've done many times over, is to start to ask yourself, okay, let me just sit with the problem for a little while and let me ask questions, but not jump to answering them. Because I think as humans, we have this just diabolical urge to answer a question, to solve a problem. And when we do that, we draw from our typical experiences, our typical ways of thinking, a lot of what's always been done in the past. And I know I hear in a lot of organizations, like, this is the way we do things around here. But when we can just stop and kind of, sit back and ask ourselves some questions about the problem. And it could be something as simple as, what if I flipped the answer to how I normally do this? What if I just flipped the script? So instead of thinking about what could make this a success, maybe for a design, it could be the architecture of a program or a system or whatever it is. Ask yourself, what if instead of thinking about everything I could do to make it successful, what if I think about everything that could make it fail? And I think all of a sudden we can start to come up with a line of sight into our work that we don't normally think of. And one of the reasons this happens is just we've woken up our thinking process during an activity that we tend to do out of habit rather than out of thoughtfulness and curiosity and creativity. And I think another thing that we can do is start to pay attention to what captures our attention in the rest of our life, in the other parts of our world outside of work. So I think, like, that's why I love architecture, because we can see what has happened in society and the reflection of it, how it shows up in design. And like, I think back to one of the designers I talked to, and I asked him, like, where did you come up with this incredible, very emotional design for a meditative space inside of a hospital? Because, the rest of the hospital had a bit of a clinical feeling. And he said, well, he had been in India and he saw a temple where people had to walk underneath an archway, and it was that process of going underneath the archway that became a mental line of demarcation from the chaos of the outside world into the calm and reflection of inside this meditative space. And I think it's really important for us as we become more innovative in our work as, engineers and as programmers and as developers, is for us to understand work and life aren't separate. And if anything, we need to bring them together more often, not so that we're working all the time, but so we understand how these little bits of experiences that we have throughout the rest of our life can really inform and drive how we find answers and creative solutions to the work that we do every single day.
Oh, that's amazing. That was indeed a response packed with so much insights. So I love your framing of AI as the machine and humans as the muse. So in the world obsessed with AI automation, what's the most critical, irreplaceable role that humans must play in the innovation process?
Well, I think one of the things we have to keep in mind with AI and how we approach it is that, of course, it can help us with efficiency. Of course, it can help us with productivity. But I think about how we approach I call it the curiosity compass. So if you think about a traditional compass that looks like this, north, south, east, west, I think about in terms of how we use AI, the thing we have to keep in mind is what direction do we want to go with our outcome? And I think of it as, like, if we look at, you know, the East position, I have to think backwards looking at me. The East position, if we think of like questions that are very tactical, on the other end of the scale of that would be questions that are very exploratory. In the South position, if we think of questions that are very logistical, on the opposite side of that would be questions that are very strategic. So, with most interactions that we have with AI, we tend to give it questions and tasks that are in that logistical and tactical quadrant, that lower left hand quadrant. And to be honest, it's a really easy place and it's a safe place for us to go, because questions that give us tactical and logistical answers also have concrete answers. What's the deadline? What are the parameters? What's the budget? Like, what's the core requirements that we have to meet in order for this to be successful? So many people limit the questions that they ask AI or how they interact with AI to this logistical tactical quadrant, because it helps them understand whether or not the answers that AI is giving them are right or wrong. So black and white kind of answers. Very efficient. um, Once we learn that we can trust it or how and when we need to check its work, that's a very easy and common way to use AI. But as we start to think about how do we blend our human creativity and bring more of our possibility into a technology like AI, then what we need to start to do is move from the lower left quadrant of tactical, logistical types of questions and thinking into the upper right hand quadrant that's all about strategy and exploring what's possible. And the way that we go from tactical and logistical to strategic and exploratory, yes, is to celebrate. There go the balloons, is based on the questions that we ask. And we need to ask questions that are open ended, that are all about possibilities, that are all about the future of what could be, in order to bring out the strategic and exploratory kind of conversations. It's a back and forth that we can have with AI instead of looking for concrete answers. Things that are probably easy for us to start out as using AI to replace Google or AI to replace another type of technology. But I think that's our biggest opportunity that we have with AI, is to look at how it can help us with the efficiency and the productivity that we've created in a world that worships standardization, but then also help us explore in a safe way questions that are exploratory, questions that are strategic, questions that don't have easy answers. And I say it's in a safe environment because when you work one on one with AI, it doesn't tell you you're dumb. It doesn't tell you you asked a stupid question. It doesn't tell you you don't know what you're doing. And I think it removes a lot of the judgment we assume that humans have when we try to work in this way in an offline world.
That is indeed interesting. I did not want to interrupt you midway, but what was the cause of those balloons that were flowing upwards?
I think it's something I tend to gesture a lot, and, maybe I'm a little bit Italian, but, sometimes when I gesture, it makes balloons go off or there's, like, thumbs
Wow,
up that start to show off, so, to be honest, I don't know what triggers it.
wow. I mean, your energy must be really lively. Even
Yeah.
Riverside had to celebrate you. So let's get practical. If a team of engineers is stuck in a cycle of incremental improvement, what's one simple exercise or question you would give them to jolt them into more bold and strategic imagination?
The one thing that I do that I feel really helps people reframe the work that they're doing and understand how fast they can jump forward is I have a formula for an objective statement. And this can be for a simple, what are we trying to accomplish today? If you're doing a stand up, if you're an agile team, or what are we trying to accomplish for a long-term project? It doesn't matter what the time frame is, but it has three parts. We need new ideas too. What's the actual work that we're trying to get done? Which is generally easy for teams and members of a team to answer. Like generally people have an agreed upon sense of what we need new ideas to. But the next part I have found is fascinating to talk through with teams. And that part is so we can. We need new ideas to come up with a new software, to come up with a new program, to come up with a new design so we can. And that question, I tell you, creates a lot of discussion on a team. And the reason that a team can feel stuck or feel that it's making just like consistently tiny incremental progress is because everybody doesn't understand and agree and align with the ultimate outcome that you're trying to accomplish. Is it so that you can replace an existing legacy software system? Is it that you're looking for a new design, for a completely new type of structure? Ultimately, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And it's so interesting. And I say this creates a lot of discussion because in people's heads, they say, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like we all know what we all know why we're here. But when I say, okay, that's great. Like, let's just get it out. Let's put it up on the wall. Like, let's write it on one of those big posted, tear off sheets and let's put it on the wall. So it's right here for all of us to just see and remember and refer back to. Something super interesting starts to happen is I'll go around a table or a Zoom call and I say, all right, like what are we trying to accomplish? Like, Ezekiel, what are we trying to accomplish? You give me your sense of what we're trying to accomplish. And then all of a sudden, three or four or five other people say, oh, no, no, that's not what I thought. I thought it was this thing over here. And all of a sudden, that while people in their head said, yeah, we know what we're trying to accomplish, everybody had their own little version of it. And it's enough different that it makes it very hard to make progress. Because as we do these incremental steps, there's always so much discussion about, no, this needs to be changed. This needs to be changed. This needs to be changed. You know what? I need to run it by so and so to get their approval and their input. And all of a sudden, meeting times explode. They get bloated. We need three or four or five more people to give their blessing on something. And it takes forever to get something done. And it's because we don't have a clear, aligned, and agreed upon ultimate outcome of what we're trying to accomplish. Now, the third part of that is with what kind of constraints? I mean, innovation and creativity would be awesome if we didn't have to live inside the real world of budgets and times and, time frames and timelines and approvals and all of these things. But understanding like what are the constraints that we have? Because all of a sudden when people see, okay, I really only have two constraints. The other things that have been holding me back in my mind are just constraints I've made up in my head. They aren't actual constraints on the project.
Wonderful. So, if you were to rewrite the rules of innovation today, with artificial intelligence as a core partner, what will be the first principle in that new rule book?
Gosh, I would say the first principle of that new rule book would to ask AI more questions about how it can help you as you start out. Because I think with a lot of scenarios, we have preconceived ideas of how it should go. But an interesting thing to ask AI, and I'm kind of generalizing here with Chat GPT, is to say, what questions do I need to be asking you that I haven't thought of? Or what's the opposite perspective of this? And I think by doing that, we realize how much we have our own bias about how things can and should be done. And we bring that bias into our work, even with AI and however it's designed to help us, because there's a whole lot of things outside of Chat GPT that we can use AI to help us. But I think understanding and asking the technology to report back to us better ways for us to take advantage of it, I think that's a great first step in how we can create a more cohesive and collaborative interaction.
Wonderful. So, for the leaders and managers in technical fields listening, what's the one permission slip that they can give to their teams this week to unlock more creative courage in them?
I think the one permission slip that they should give to their teams is to take 15 minutes and study something interesting from completely outside of your industry and then report back to the team what you saw and why you found it interesting. And the reason I think this is so important is because when we look at big ideas, big technology disruptions, big companies that are launched, generally those big ideas came from someplace else outside of the industry. So I think of Jeff Hoffman, who's a serial entrepreneur. He happened to be at the grocery store one day and he walked by the banana stand and here's the, beautiful yellow bananas ready to eat. And over here's those brown bananas that they always have half off because they're trying to get rid of them. And Jeff is looking at that and he's thinking, here's an example of how can a business owner recoup some of the cost of investment in a product, a banana, rather than having to get rid of it altogether because it's a perishable item. And he asked himself, okay, what other industries have a perishable thing that they sell that is time sensitive that I could apply this banana pricing to? And he happened to know a few people in the travel industry. And so he called up one of his buddies and he said, you know, all these seats that are empty when a flight takes off? Now, this was pre COVID. Those empty seats, like what happens to those seats? And his friend says, well, we just take a loss on it. And he said, well, if I could help you get maybe half the cost, like full retail value of a seat, half the cost rather than it going empty, is that something that you would be interested in if I could figure out a way to do that at scale? And his friend said, "Oh, absolutely." And that's how the idea for the company of Priceline was born. I mean, nobody calls it the brown banana of travel, but that's essentially the idea behind it. And it's been that whole philosophy that's made Jeff Hoffman incredibly successful. And as we think about this with our technical listeners and engineers, one of the things that Jeff talks about all the time is take 15 minutes every single day and learn something from outside of your own industry. Because really, if we're wanting to show up different, do something different, solve a problem in a different way, we will never get there if we're only focusing in the same pool of information that we operate in the other 23 hours and 45 minutes of the day. And 15 minutes, if you don't have 15 minutes, there's something else that you need to look at beyond your creativity and innovative thinking that will get you that 15 minutes. Maybe you need more AI to help you be productive first.
Oh, wow, that's truly insightful, Carla. So, I'd like to ask, from your perspective, What's the most underutilized tool or mindset for driving innovation that most technical teams already have access to?
I would say meditation.
Hmm.
And the reason this is why, and I know a lot of technical teams are under incredible pressure right now. And there's an interesting thing that happens in our brain when we're under pressure, and and I'm a type A person, so I've learned this firsthand, is that we get so focused on the problem and it's come on, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's figure it out, let's go, let's go. And that moves your brain waves up into high beta, that fight or flight. And when you're purely focused on survival, however you define survival in your world, hitting a deadline, hitting a budget, getting whatever done, you cannot be in survival mode and be creative at the same time. So the only thing that we can do then is to be able to come down out of that fight or flight mindset. And the quickest way to do that is to take some deep breaths. You can do a 3-minute meditation. If you can do a 15, 20, 30-minute meditation every single day to train your brain to come down into, alpha or theta mode, that's where real creativity comes into place. Now, I've heard this attributed to a lot of amazing, famous people. Richard Feynman, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein. But the story, they put like some metal keys in their hand or some metal balls in their hand, and then they sit down in a chair and they start to doze off, and they put a metal plate under their hand. And so as their body starts to relax and they move from that high beta into that theta, that relaxed brain state, their hand relaxes and the metal keys or balls drop out of their hand and hit this metal plate. That wakes them up. And the reason whoever this actually, whoever the first person to do this was, they understood that creative thinking comes in that theta brainwave. And so we have to create a habit of moving into that more relaxed state where our brain naturally connects dots and makes connections. And I mean, it's that very principle is why we can be so stuck on an idea and wake up in the morning and the answer pops into our head because our brain waves have relaxed and we're in that theta state. Water doesn't. That's why we get ideas in the shower. Repetitive motion does it. I get a ton of ideas when I'm out running, hiking, anything with repetitive motion. So, however you get into that meditative state, even if it's just for a few minutes, that will do amazing things for your creativity and innovative thinking.
Interesting. So, after a career of helping the world's biggest companies rethink innovation, I like to ask, what does the word innovation truly mean to you?
When I think about innovation, and I developed this definition of innovation for me after researching and interviewing hundreds of some of the world's most innovative thinkers all around the world, different industries, different types of companies and sizes of companies, is that I think of innovation as the ability to consistently come up with new, great, and reliable ideas. Now, one, I like it because it's a simple definition. You and I both know what each of those words mean. And it sounds simple, but I'm going to take a minute and unpack it here just for a second. So, if we think about a new idea doesn't have to be something that has never, ever been done before, ever. A new idea may just be application of thinking from another industry into our industry. So I came across the story of McDonald's and how they were trying to improve the efficiency and customer satisfaction of their fast food drive-through. And they said, we've done the lean process, we've done Six Sigma, we've done all these things, and we still struggle with customer satisfaction and getting people cars through fast enough. And so they said, okay, where can we learn from somebody who does this really well? They happened to tap into a Formula One pit stop team. And they said it's a team that needs to get cars in and out of a situation very fast, very accurately. Now, nicely for McDonald's, it wasn't a life and death situation like it is for Formula One. So they took lessons from Formula One and applied it to their fast food restaurant and redesigned that drive through experience. And it became very successful. Now, was it a new idea that had never been done before? No, but it was a new idea to the fast food industry. Now, the second word, a great idea, is a little more subjective because what I might think is a great idea, Ezekiel, you may think, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous, and vice versa. So, a great idea is one that's a little bit more subjective. But advertising great David Ogilvy said, a great idea is when you get goosebumps or maybe the hair stands up on the back of your neck, like you just get a visceral physical feeling that this is an amazing idea. But even a new idea and a great idea isn't enough to drive innovation, because at the end of the day, the difference between creativity and innovation is that innovation is executable. And that's where the word reliable idea comes in. So, a reliable idea is actually something that impacts the bottom line. Yes, it can be a financial performance, but it can also be error rate. It could be customer experience. It could be a whole lot of things. So, when I think of innovation, it's the ability to come up with new, great, and reliable ideas, ideas that have all three of those characteristics. But the innovative people who I researched and worked with had that ability to come up with these ideas, with these characteristics consistently over and over and over again. I mean, can you do an innovative thing? Yes, we see a lot of one-hit wonders, but true innovation, in my opinion, is that ability to consistently come up with ideas that have these characteristics and impact the business.
Wonderful, wonderful. Finally, Carla, for our listeners who are inspired to rethink their own approach to innovation, what's the best place for them to connect with you, or get your resources, or maybe just generally learn more about your work?
Absolutely. I invite you to come to my website. It's my name, Carla with a C Johnson .co. There's no M, it's just .co. And on there you will see a lot of resources. I've been blogging for almost 14 years, incredible amount of blogs on a lot of different areas of creative thinking, innovative thinking, curiosity. But while you're there, please sign up for my newsletter called the Rethink Lab. And that comes out every other Tuesday. And in it, I teach you a lesson, a technique, a tool, or share a story about somebody or someone or a situation that has been incredibly innovative, that my readers can read and then start to apply their learning lessons right away.
Wonderful, wonderful, Carla. It's been a really interesting and insightful conversation with you, and I am excited to have you on the show today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, likewise.